The transmission came through all known channels, a deep, reverberating voice layered with the unmistakable arrogance of a species that had never once known failure. The image of King Phylox the Infinite, supreme ruler of the Vakar Empire, flickered into view, towering over his court of elaborately armored warlords. His violet-skinned features twisted into what could only be described as a sneer, an expression he had perfected over the years as he conquered lesser species without effort. "Humans," he began, dragging out the word as though the very syllables tasted foul. "Your existence is an affront to the order of the galaxy. Your quaint little planet, your primitive weapons, your insignificant reach. You are insects scuttling about, unaware of the great boot poised above you. And now that boot comes down." The Vakar warlords erupted in raucous laughter behind him, the kind of laughter that echoed across battlefields soaked in the blood of the defeated. But they weren't just laughing at the humans. They were laughing because, to them, this wasn't even war. It was extermination. On Earth, the world watched in silence. Billions of humans across nations, cities, and bunkers listened to the declaration, some in disbelief, others with grim recognition. But within the United Human Defense Initiative's war room, the response was far less solemn. Seated at a round table of generals, strategists, and political leaders, Sergeant Riley Russell leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. She was in her late 20s, with a short military crop of dark hair, and the kind of expression that suggested she had seen every kind of stupid decision a person could make. She watched the broadcast, unimpressed. "Oh no," she deadpanned. "A 10-foot-tall alien with delusions of grandeur wants to kill us. Someone quick, get this guy a Twitter account so he can make it official." General Matthews, a no-nonsense commander with more scars than patience, shot her a look. "Russell, now's not the time." "Disagree," she said, sitting up. "It's exactly the time." She gestured toward the screen, where Phylox had launched into another monologue about how resistance was futile. "I mean, look at this guy. He's like if Skeletor and an economy class Sith Lord had a love child." Despite himself, Lieutenant Vasquez snorted. Matthews sighed, rubbing his temples. "This isn't a joke. We have no defenses against an empire of this size. Our weapons are outdated compared to theirs. If their blockade holds, Earth won't last 6 months." "They think we have no defenses," Vasquez corrected. He was a sniper by trade, but in moments like these, his analytical mind came through. "They're underestimating us." Riley smirked. "That's what I'm banking on." She turned to the holographic display of the Vakar Armada, a massive formation of warships surrounding Earth. They'd already established their first wave of control, taking out satellites, jamming communications beyond planetary reach, and positioning themselves like lions circling a wounded prey. If nothing changed, the next few days would be a slow, inevitable slaughter. "So," she continued, placing her boots up on the table, "who's got a plan? And by plan, I mean something actually crazy enough to work." Matthews hesitated. The room did, too. And that was Riley's first clue that the only plans on the table were the kind where humanity lost slowly instead of instantly. A moment later, Nick Alvarez, the squad's tech specialist, walked in, balancing a cup of coffee and a tablet filled with data streams. He was younger, early 20s, with an expression permanently stuck between exhaustion and curiosity. "You guys are going to love this," he said, barely suppressing a grin. He tapped a few keys, and the holographic display changed. Instead of the terrifying Vakar fleet, the screen now showed a rapidly rotating blueprint of Phylox's capital city, Zephyr 9. "This is their capital," Alvarez explained, scrolling through layouts of the Grand Palace and its security defenses. "Turns out, the Vakar are insanely confident about their security. No planetary shields. No external defense turrets. Just guards and internal systems, because they've never had to deal with an enemy crazy enough to attack their homeworld directly." Riley's grin widened. "Let me guess. We're going to be the first." Matthews exhaled sharply. "It's suicide." Alvarez shook his head. "Not if we do it right. We've been playing defense, and it's not working. But if we take their king, if we drag him through the streets, let the entire galaxy watch as he bleeds out in front of them, that empire collapses overnight." The room went dead silent. Then, slowly, Riley stood. "All right," she said. "I'm in." Matthews stared at her like she'd gone insane. "Russell." "Sir," she interrupted, "we've been at war for 2 weeks, and they haven't taken us seriously. They think we're weak. They think we're jokes. So let's be the biggest goddamn joke they've ever seen." A slow grin spread across Vasquez's face. Alvarez's, too. Even Jackson, their demolitions expert, cracked his knuckles and muttered, "Well, I do love a good explosion." Matthews shook his head, exasperated. "You're all out of your minds." "Maybe," Riley admitted, adjusting the strap of her combat vest. "But if we're going out, let's go out legendary." The mission was absurd. That's what made it perfect. The strike team consisted of only 5 humans, Riley, Alvarez, Vasquez, Jackson, and a pilot named Samara, whose last name no one ever learned because she preferred call signs. Their infiltration would rely on an old-school tactic that had worked far too many times in human history, pretending to be something they weren't. The VA car, for all their superiority, had an overwhelming paranoia of human biological warfare. The idea that Earth was a walking petri dish of deadly bacteria terrified them to the point where they refused to set foot on the planet itself. So, when Riley and her squad landed on Zephyr 9, they didn't arrive as soldiers. They arrived as an intergalactic health inspection team. The deception worked for exactly 14 minutes before the first fight broke out. A VA car guard, suspicious of why these health inspectors were carrying so many weapons, demanded an explanation. Riley, without missing a beat, had simply replied, "Oh, these? Standard Earth immunization devices." Unfortunately, Jackson had laughed. That was when all hell broke loose. Plasma rounds scorched the air. Riley ducked behind an ornate pillar, drawing her sidearm and firing a clean shot through the first VA car's skull. Vasquez covered her from above, picking off enemies with precision, while Jackson and Alvarez worked on hacking the security doors that led to Phylox's throne room. "They really thought we were health inspectors," Jackson said between bursts of gunfire. "Well," Riley said, kicking a stunned guard off a ledge, "technically, we're here to remove a disease." The last of the VA car guards fell, and the team breached the throne room doors. Inside, King Phylox stood, eyes wide, as Riley stepped forward, gun raised. The broadcast cameras were still on, still streaming this moment to billions across the galaxy. Phylox opened his mouth to speak, but Riley cut him off. "Surprise, dumbass." She fired. The shot took him in the leg. Phylox screamed, collapsing to one knee. His warlords, those who had laughed at humanity only days before, stared in horror. The impossible had happened. Earth hadn't just fought back. Earth had won. And as Riley grabbed Phylox by his ornate royal robes, dragging his massive form toward the palace doors, the humans of Earth began their victory. Because the best way to end an empire? Drag its king through the streets. The stolen VA car transport vessel shuddered slightly as it passed through the heavy atmosphere of Zephyr 9, the capital of the VA car empire. The view through the cockpit window was both awe-inspiring and infuriating. Below them stretched an enormous metropolis of sharp, gleaming architecture, the towering spires reaching toward the dark green sky, an arrogant display of wealth and power. Everything about the city was perfectly symmetrical, artificial, as if it had been constructed to reflect the Empire's belief in their own superiority. Riley Russell, seated in the co-pilot's chair, was not impressed. Would it kill these guys to put in a single messy street? Maybe a back alley? A parking lot? She muttered, adjusting the straps on her combat vest. To be fair, Vasquez said, leaning back with his sniper rifle across his lap, if my species had never lost a war, I'd probably build my cities like a smug asshole too. Nick Alvarez, the team's tech specialist, was tapping furiously at his tablet, monitoring security feeds. "All right, listen up. We're officially on the approved landing list, but that's only going to last another 6 minutes before they realize this isn't their ship anymore." He glanced up. "When we land, everyone stick to the plan. Walk fast, look important, and whatever you do, don't speak first. VA car officials expect underlings to wait until spoken to. It's a cultural thing." Jackson, the demolitions expert, grinned. What happens if one of them does talk to us first? Then we answer in the most condescending way possible, Riley said, standing. Let's move. The ship touched down with a soft hiss, the landing bay already bustling with VA car officers and bureaucrats, all dressed in their flowing, embroidered uniforms. The team stepped off the ramp, each of them clad in sleek, unmarked armor that Alvarez had designed to look just VA car enough to avoid suspicion. They carried notebooks and datapads, as if they belonged to some shadowy division of Imperial Sanitation and Disease Control, which, as it turned out, actually existed. Riley adjusted the high collar of her disguise and led the team forward at a brisk pace. Immediately, a hulking VA car official blocked their path, his golden insignia indicating a mid-level rank. His reptilian features twisted into a look of skepticism. "You there," he barked, narrowing his glowing yellow eyes. "You are not the usual inspectors." Riley barely glanced at him. "Your usual inspectors," she said, her voice dripping with professional disinterest, "were reallocated. We are the new review team, sent under Imperial Authority Directive 86, RX-9. She shoved a forged datapad under his nose, the alien text glowing menacingly. The VA car hesitated, eyes darting to the screen, his lips pressed together in visible discomfort. Riley knew exactly why Directive 86, RX-9 did not exist. And because it did not exist, he would never admit he didn't know what it was. The VA car cleared his throat. Yes. Of course. Proceed." Riley did not thank him. That would have implied weakness. She simply nodded sharply, then walked past him without another word. As they entered the main corridors of the Grand Imperial Complex, Vasquez whistled under his breath. "You just bluffed a guy twice your size with nothing but a fake directive." "It's the universal truth of bureaucracy," Riley said. "The bigger the system, the more terrified its employees are of looking uninformed." They passed through a lavish hallway lined with massive portraits of King Phylox, each one depicting him in increasingly absurd poses, conquering planets, standing atop mountains, holding entire galaxies in his palm like some overgrown Saturday morning cartoon villain. Jackson, unable to help himself, muttered, "This guy's really got a thing for himself, huh?" Alvarez smirked but didn't slow his pace. "We're approaching the central data hub. I need 90 seconds to plant the virus and lock the palace doors remotely." The plan was simple in theory. Infiltrate the Grand Imperial Complex, reach the palace fortress, isolate King Phylox, and make a very public display of his demise. What happened after that? Probably chaos. They reached a towering set of ornate doors, flanked by 2 VA car guards who looked even more irritated than usual. The team strode forward as if they belonged. But just as Riley prepared to walk past them, one of the guards stepped directly into her path. "Hold," he said. Riley did not stop walking. Instead, she scoffed audibly, turning just enough to glare at him, as if he were the single dumbest creature in existence. The VA car faltered. "My unit is on a highly classified biohazard evaluation, and you are wasting our time," she snapped, her expression as imperious and offended as she could make it. "Do you wish to be personally responsible for a level 4 contamination violation?" The guard stiffened, his 4-fingered hands curling into anxious fists. "And no, of course not. I was only—" "Then move," Riley ordered. The guards moved. Vasquez exhaled sharply as they entered the secured wing of the complex. "I cannot believe that worked again. They're a species built on hierarchy," Riley said. "They don't question authority because they don't think they need to." They rounded a corner, and Alvarez gestured toward a massive data terminal embedded in the wall. "This is it. Give me 60 seconds." As he set to work, Riley and Vasquez took up guard positions. The corridors here were eerily silent, the usual hum of activity absent. Then, suddenly, a voice boomed from the palace intercoms. "Who dares breach the sanctuary of Phylox the Infinite?" The team froze. Alvarez cursed under his breath, fingers flying over his tablet. "Something's wrong. I think the security system just flagged our access codes." Riley didn't hesitate. She grabbed her radio and barked, "Samara, we need an emergency blackout on their security grid. Now." "On it," their pilot's voice crackled back. The lights flickered, then plunged the corridor into darkness. Vasquez moved first, lifting his rifle. "We need to move, now." Footsteps thundered down the halls. Jackson pulled out a small explosive charge and slapped it against the nearest support column. "We're about to make a real dramatic exit." Alvarez ripped a cable from the data port and grinned. "Good news, I locked down the throne room. That bastard isn't going anywhere." Riley turned toward the approaching guards and cocked her rifle. "Good, because I really want to meet him." The explosives detonated, collapsing part of the corridor behind them. And just like that, the VA car capital fell into chaos. The throne room of King Phylox, the Infinite, was built to inspire fear. Towering pillars of obsidian and silver rose into a domed ceiling that mimicked the swirling void of deep space, vast and infinite. The floor was polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the kneeling forms of hundreds of subjugated officials, each one bowing in silent reverence to the monstrous figure seated upon the throne. King Phylox had ruled for nearly 2 centuries, and in that time, he had never once known fear. Until now. The blast doors slammed open with a thunderous crash, the sound reverberating across the chamber like the opening chords of a war march. The kneeling officials gasped, their eyes snapping upward as a squad of humans strode through the smoke and debris, stepping onto the pristine marble with absolute defiance. Leading them was Sergeant Riley Russell, a smear of blood and ash streaking across her cheek, her rifle still smoking from the last shot she had fired. She did not hesitate. She did not slow. She walked like she owned the place, her boots clicking in rhythmic defiance against the alien stone. King Phylox rose from his throne, his massive, armored frame dwarfing every being in the room. His deep violet skin rippled as he flexed his claws, his molten yellow eyes narrowing in unmasked fury. "You dare enter my domain?" Phylox's voice rumbled like distant thunder, his many-layered vocal cords twisting the words into something that made the lesser species of the galaxy tremble. But Riley was not lesser. She tilted her head slightly, lips curling into something just shy of amusement. "Yeah," she said, rolling her shoulders as if she were stepping into a boxing ring instead of the seat of a galactic empire. "Daring is kind to our thing." Phylox took a step forward, his heavy battle armor clanking as he moved. His regal robe, lined with the torn banners of defeated civilizations, swayed behind him. "You are but a pest," he snarled, "a fleeting, insignificant speck in the grand symphony of my rule." Riley nodded. "Uh-huh. And yet," she gestured around the room, at the shocked expressions of the VA car court, at the burning halls behind them. "I'm the one standing here, and you're the one running out of options." The silence in the room was suffocating. Phylox's eyes flickered toward the great doors, the only exit now sealed shut by Alvarez's hacking. Riley saw it immediately. "You thinking of running?" she asked, almost offended. "I expected more." Phylox's lips pulled back, revealing rows of razor-sharp fangs. "I do not run," he spat. "Good," Riley replied, cracking her knuckles. "Then let's do this." The first strike came faster than anyone in the room anticipated. Phylox lunged, his gravity hammer materializing in his hands as he brought it down with enough force to shatter a tank. But Riley was already moving. She rolled forward, sliding between his legs as the hammer obliterated the floor where she had just been standing. The impact sent a shockwave rippling through the chamber, sending VA car officials scrambling away in terror. Vasquez opened fire, his sniper rounds pinging uselessly off Phylox's reinforced battle plating. Jackson threw a plasma grenade, but Phylox simply swatted it away mid-air, sending it detonating harmlessly into a wall. "Okay," Jackson muttered. "So that didn't work." Phylox turned, his massive shadow looming over Riley, his molten eyes narrowing. "You cannot defeat me, human." Riley smirked. "See, that's where you messed up." She dashed forward, dodging left, then right, weaving beneath the king's massive arms before planting both feet and swinging her knife upward. The blade, forged from Earth's most advanced alloys, found a gap in the armor, right beneath the ribs. Phylox roared, staggering backward. It was the first real injury he had sustained in over a century, and he felt it. The court watched in horror as a trickle of dark blue blood seeped from the wound, dripping onto the pristine white marble. A hushed murmur spread through the room. Phylox's perfect, untouchable image was shattering. And Riley wasn't done. She kicked off the ground, launching herself upward, using his own armor as leverage as she scaled his massive frame like a rock climber. Phylox swung wildly, trying to dislodge her, but she was too fast. She reached his shoulder, locked her legs around his neck, and yanked her knife across his throat. The blades sliced deep, but not deep enough to kill. No, that part would come next. Phylox staggered, his hands clutching his bleeding neck, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You," he gasped. "You are impossible." Riley dropped down in front of him, flicking the blue blood from her knife as she tilted her head. "You know what the funniest part is?" she asked, stepping forward. "We didn't even need advanced alien tech to take you down." Phylox stumbled, dropping to one knee. "Just grit," she continued, circling him like a predator, some good old-fashioned dirty fighting, and a metric ton of human pettiness. Then she grabbed one of the fallen royal banners, wrapped it around his thick throat, and yanked. The king of the Vakar Empire, conqueror of worlds, collapsed forward, gasping, choking, as a mere human dragged him face-first across his own throne room. The court officials watched in stunned silence, their entire belief system collapsing before them. The unstoppable was now on the ground. And the humans? They were standing over him. Riley wiped the sweat from her forehead, then tilted her head toward the palace doors. "Jackson," she called out, "get the vehicle ready." Jackson grinned, already placing explosives along the outer walls. "Way ahead of you." Riley turned back to Phylox, whose massive form twitched weakly, his eyes still burning with defiance, even as his strength faded. "You are nothing," he choked out. Riley crouched next to him, resting an elbow on her knee. "Yeah," she said, raising an eyebrow. "Then why are you the one being dragged out of your own palace?" With that, she wrapped the banner tighter, securing it to the back of the armored vehicle waiting just outside. And then she dragged him out, his massive form scraping across the streets of Zephyr 9, his people watching in horrified awe. For the first time in their empire's long, undefeated history, the Vakar saw what true defeat looked like. It wasn't a battle. It wasn't a war. It was their greatest ruler, humiliated, broken, and utterly powerless at the hands of a single human. The empire began to crumble that very moment. And Riley? She just kept dragging. The streets of Zephyr 9, once the pristine heart of the Vakar Empire, were now filled with a sound they had never known before. Silence. Not the silence of reverence, nor the stillness of order, but something deeper, something that crawled into the bones of every Vakar who witnessed their god-emperor dragged like a corpse through the dust. Riley Russell had seen fear before, but never like this. The elite warriors, the so-called invincible forces of the Vakar, stood frozen along the avenues as their king, Phylox the Infinite, the untouchable, the unconquerable, was hauled across his own streets, his regal robes torn and filthy, his massive form limp, his ornate crown lost somewhere in the rubble. His people did not kneel. They did not rush forward to save him. They only stared, horror replacing faith, as the undeniable truth settled into their bones. The humans had won. Riley walked beside the armored vehicle, her rifle slung across her back, her boots crunching against the once immaculate pavement. She could feel thousands of Vakar eyes on her, but none dared move. "You know," Jackson mused from the driver's seat, casually flicking a toothpick between his teeth, "I expected a little more resistance." "They don't know how to fight when the script flips," Vasquez said, perched on top of the vehicle with his rifle in hand, scanning the rooftops for any last-ditch attempts at heroism. "They only know how to win. Losing? They've got no manual for that." Riley glanced toward the palace, its monstrous spires looming in the distance, the last remnants of smoke curling into the green sky. The walls, once a monument to Vakar dominance, were scarred from explosions, entire sections crumbling into ruin. Alvarez tapped at his tablet, still monitoring the hacked communication lines. "We've got full control of their broadcast networks. The entire empire just watched their leader get his ass kicked." He paused reading something. "And we're getting surrender pings. A lot of them." Riley smirked. "Of course we are." She turned her gaze back to the capital, where VA civilians were beginning to emerge from their sterile, towering structures. They stepped cautiously, their expressions ranging from disbelief to abject terror. Not because of the destruction, not because of the invaders, but because they had been taught one simple, unwavering truth their entire lives. The king does not fall. And yet, a VA child no more than 7 feet tall, tiny by their species standards, stood near the curb, his glowing yellow eyes wide and unblinking as he clutched his father's sleeve. His father, a former official, by the look of his intricate robes, merely stared at his fallen ruler, his fingers trembling. The child, with the honest simplicity only children possess, asked, "Father, what do we do now?" And that was it. That was the moment the empire broke. The murmurs spread like wildfire. From the balconies, from the doorways, from the shadowed alleys of the once invincible capital, voices rose, hushed and uncertain, as millennia of indoctrination collapsed in seconds. The whispers became questions, the questions became realization, and the realization became something even the humans hadn't anticipated. Rage. Not toward the humans, toward the VA empire itself. A stone flew first, hurled from an unknown hand, bouncing off Phylox's useless, armored form. Then another. And then, the dam burst. The people of Zephyr 9, of the entire VA empire, finally saw their king for what he was. Not a god, not a legend, just a being. A being who bled, who lost, who wasn't worthy of their fear anymore. The riot ignited in seconds. It began with the civilians, but the soldiers soon followed. The guards who had once crushed revolts with impunity now turned their weapons, not on the humans, but on the palace, on the banners, on the symbols of a rule built on arrogance and fear. Riley didn't flinch as statues of Phylox toppled, crashing into the streets below. Jackson gave a low whistle. That escalated quickly. Alvarez read through the flood of intercepted communications. "Oh yeah, this isn't just here. Every VA colony is in full panic mode. Governors are bailing, warlords are scrambling. Hell, I think a few of them are already declaring independence." Vasquez laughed. "It's always the second-in-commands who flip first." Riley finally stopped walking. She turned and looked at the ruined, twitching body of Phylox, still barely conscious, his once perfect visage now bloodied and broken, a smear on the streets of his own empire. She crouched beside him, voice low, just for him. "Here's the thing about humans," she murmured. "You thought we were weak because we didn't fight like you. You thought you could mock us, humiliate us, break us." She leaned in just a little closer. "But we don't break. We just wait." Phylox's breath was shallow now, his four-clawed fingers twitching, as if trying to grasp onto a power that had already slipped away. "This is how it ends," Riley continued. "Not with a war. Not with some grand last stand. Just a human, dragging your sorry ass through the streets, while your empire burns behind you." Phylox managed a weak, rasping breath. "You are monsters." Riley chuckled. "Nah, we're just petty as hell." She stood, taking a slow step back. Then, without another word, she raised her pistol, aimed between his molten yellow eyes, and pulled the trigger. The last king of the VA empire died with his face in the dirt. The streets roared in approval. The footage spread in minutes. And across the entire galaxy, the realization settled like a storm front on every empire, every warlord, every species that had ever laughed at humanity. The humans had done the impossible. They hadn't just fought the greatest empire in the galaxy. They had humiliated it, crushed its pride, and walked away grinning. The message was clear. Do not mess with Earth, because if you do, they will drag your king through the streets and shoot him in the head. Riley took a deep breath, exhaling as she turned back toward the team. "So," she said, slinging her rifle over her shoulder. "Pizza." Jackson grinned. "Hell yeah." And just like that, they walked away, leaving the ruins of an empire behind them.